Okay, now that I remember to turn off the mute button on my laptop. Second time I've done that on the video, huh? Ain't that something? Let me just take a sip of water real quick. So, water bottle. There we are. There we are. Disgusting. Um, I'm going to be doing my best to like talk about pacing in stories today, at least if that's how everything goes to plan. I just got finished watching the newest Extra Tuna video. You might know Extra Tuna as the guy that made the Jackie's Box song. At the time of recording, it's beginning to look a not like Snow Globe Christmas Paradise. Probably some of their best work to date. I will say it was great. David takes another sip of water. As my friend, who I'm still trying to press gag into recording with me, has said, he evokes many emotions from me, mostly hysteria. To which I could not agree more. I'm sure there's other emotions in me that I can't name, but I'm sure they're there. So, as mentioned, we are going to be trying to have an attempt at talking about pacing. Now, it's an issue many people face, not only for their taste of water, not only for their written work, but also for like their tabletop games and things like that. I know I struggle with it, right? I still struggle with it, admittedly, because it's very hard to like know when to pace yourself. Like personally speaking, oftentimes I get these sorts of like ideas for my stories that I want to like put away to just go do the parts that are fun. But I know I have to like spend the time to set up the scenes, to go through character development, or to have these scenes pay off, to set the stage for heroism or cowardice, Darkest Dungeon lines, and other things like that, you know? As I. Oh, is this empty? It is. Um, but, it's probably not a feeling that'll go away because, like, hey, I have ideas for fun scenes and I want to do the fun scenes, but there's stuff I have to do before that. And, I'm sure everyone understands this feeling, right? And though we've all been there, where you think of something really cool, write it down, and then just have to slog through 20,000 words in order to be able to write up what you finally want to do. Or as a DM, take a sip of water. Or as a DM, you get an idea for a really cool, really involved uh, dungeon, or really cool event in the town, or very cool monster stat block for a few higher levels than your party currently is. And you have to do a few more sessions before you can get to that wonderful scene you've been planning for the better half of a month and a half now. I'm sure we all, get this, but it's something you have to go through before you can get to the meat of what you want to write. And it's a bit upsetting sometimes, but hey, eventually you'll learn to find fun in the in between parts. Unless, your between parts are like 2,000 words, in which case it feels like a slog, but that's still vital stuff. It's one of those ones where I have notes again. I'm also trying a new thing where I'm sitting on the ground for like, and my laptop's on my bed so that I can have like a bit of better posture. We'll see if I like this. I also have notes again. Almost spat on my ground. Um, which one to start with? Specific plot, specific breakneck, basic scene, stories, character pacing, too slow, too late, too early, skeleton plots. I'll leave skeleton plots for the middle. Right, if this is your first one watching, you can go to the description and there will be the points I cover, like the general points I cover, and then I'll break away into tangents as necessary. They won't be in order. I'll just pick at the ones I want to pick at for the first. Um, that being said, I will do genre specific first. So keep in mind that I only really write fantasy, but still. different genres tend to have different sorts of pacing for them, right? If you could consider fan fiction a genre, and I think I do because hey, I write fan fiction too. Um, and also, where the fuck did my phone go? That's a separate. There it is. Because hey, I write fan fiction myself too, but also because it's like a whole category at this point, and it's gonna be rainy soon again. I like that. I had a wonderful nap earlier in the very cozy rain. To clarify, while it was raining, I was not out physically in the rain. So as I'd like that, I'd get sick, and that's no fun because I want to record, and when I get sick, I quite frankly cannot carry my train of thought. Maybe thinking you aren't right now, but you see, it gets real bad when I'm sick. Anyway, keep in mind that I only really write fantasy. That's kind of like my whole deal, but like from what I've because I read other genres too, you know. I mentioned already steampunk, horror. Horror is a genre I find myself loving a lot. It's something I like dipping my toes into, but don't stick with usually, like superhero stories. Um, Sorry, I sipped water. Future settings aren't my jam, but even still. All these sorts of things have different sorts of pacing, like guidelines, rules of thumb that you can kind of feel. And most of it comes with the sorts of lots you're running and tech level time period stuff you're running. I mentioned before, vaguely at one point, maybe I think. So maybe I didn't mention before at all. Consider fantasy travel to sci-fi future setting travel. With future setting travel, presumably your story has FTL travel because lots of those sorts of stories have FTL travel, faster than light, which means like the parts of your story where you're just spending from place to place are are a lot more truncated, and you don't need to spend as much time focusing on it, as opposed to fantasy, where there is a lot of time spent going from location to location as the plot demands it, because you're working with on foot or carriages at the very most, unless you know you have like dragon riding or something. In which, because again, there's always exceptions for every rule, and maybe your sci-fi settings don't have FTL travel. Who knows? Or maybe you're not in space at all, but which I prefer because I don't. And from my experience, space travel is really just like a slog to get to the story button. But that's the sort of thing right there, right? Is like pacing yourself, not only like literally like physically pacing yourself, but also pacing your stories out, because the stories you'll tell, the plots that are given to you with the genre conventions set before you, will likely account for some sort of pace breaker in your story. Now, pace breaker is what it sounds like. It breaks up the current pace and flow of your story to either have a scene that spends its time slow cooking, right? You just rubbed it with the marinade and you just set it into the water with onions, carrots, potatoes, some bouillon cubes, and stock. And you're slow heating it to make a nice stew. Or you're making stir fry, right? And instead of like the long, slow, it takes time with itself pace breaker, you instead have a quick, snappy, punchy sort of scene, like maybe a combat scene, right? That's a nice pace breaker. This happens in games too. That's where like the turret section comes in stories, where the whatever the word is, uh, beach episode in anime, as it's usually called. I'm not really an anime guy. Fun fact: okay, I watched the entirety of Naruto, including all of the filler, which was not very fun. And when I was younger than that, I watched Yu Yu Hakusho, which was bitchin', and still is. It's just not really my thing. The animation style is nice. It's just like maybe I just picked the wrong ones, but the stories did not gel with me. So I stick to the written word mostly. But I distracted myself again. What was I saying? Right. Um, that's where you get your famed beach episode. And then if you are playing tabletop games, that's where you'll get your shopkeeper roleplay. Takes a sip of water. Because I swear, I have not played a single campaign. Hell, I don't think I've even played a session of not a session, an instance of D&D at all, including multi-shots and fucking one-shots, where we did not do customer service roleplay in some capacity. Is it a law of tabletop that you will eventually do customer service roleplay? Either as like a tavern owner or a shop owner or like a bazaar scene, as in bazaar like open market, town like town bazaar, not bazaar as in weird. Is that just like a law of tabletop that you're gonna do that at some point? They've done that in like every campaign, multi and one shot. That's weird, isn't it? It's fun though. I love me some good customer service roleplay, especially when your character, well, especially when your players get into it, because that lets you subtly drop plot threads and hints at to what their story will be. But and the sorts of pace breakers that you'll be given are pretty confined. Not not as in there's no crossover whatsoever. If you are this genre, you do these. No, but generally speaking, they're pretty like cut and dry. I mentioned already with fantasy, it's usually like a carriage ride, and I mentioned already with sci-fi how they're usually like wipes my nose, how they're usually like scenes in a spaceship, because I presume this is a future setting where you're in space, because a lot of sci-fi ends up doing that. Uh, and the times you'll spend with these are different, right? Both in and out of universe. Sorry, just keep sipping water. Remember to hydrate yourselves and eat healthily, shower regularly, brush your teeth, all that sorts of stuff. Get some good sleep. I am a wreck, and I still probably am fairly healthy consider in comparison to you. Don't let the guy who doesn't go outside, who seldom talks to people, who seldom eats and is sub 100 pounds with acid scarring in his throat one up you. What was that about? Right. Like some other like fantasy ones specifically that'll end up being pace breakers are tavern scenes, right, where you gather around a tavern. The loved campfire scene, where it's between like it's even between travel, where those like set up a campfire and exposit at each other or reveal facets about each other in a natural way with a nice peaceful setting. Let your characters grow with one another and therefore with the audience. Things like that. But the overall plot pacing, not plot pacing, well, I guess yeah, the overall plot pacing is pretty hinged upon the um genre. I tend to find fantasy has a lot higher stakes than sci-fi. Maybe I'm just reading the wrong sci-fi stories, but I tend to find fantasy has a lot higher stakes than the typical sci-fi story, which lets fantasy have a quicker overall pace, even though it should a quicker overall pace out of universe, whereas in universe, it does take these kind of long amounts of time. But us, as the reader, as the audience, what have you, are experiencing it in a much faster way because we gloss over the things that are boring, hopefully, boring or have no bearing on the plot, in order to give us the substance, the meat of it, which makes the whole story have a much quicker pace. Whereas with sci-fi, again, depending on the plot that you're given with the story, I tend to find it lends itself to just to basking in its scenes a lot more, to having a bit of a slower pace and setting things up like that, right? Again, maybe I'm reading the wrong stories, but that's just the things I tend to find. Steampunk is kind of a toss-up, but I also usually find that it lets itself be slower. Same for diesel punk, but I can't ever find no diesel punk stories, so I don't know. I can't verify that much. And then horror is something that really, really benefits from just letting itself go slowly, dictate its own pace. But that much was clear. So I'm going to mention plot specific very quickly. The pacing will your pacing will be heavily dictated on your plot. The countdown timer, right? It's like Avatar: Last Airbender did that, where they had to where Aang has to master bending before Sozin's comet comes around. Well, let me get some water. Which gave the story the much needed narrative thrust that it was lacking until that point in the story, which lets the pacing pick up to that lets the pacing pick up and build towards the finale. So it depends heavily on your plot. If you're doing a slice of life story, your pacing will probably be very slow, and also I don't like reading slice of life stories. In terms of fan fiction, I prefer when your plot is canon divergent and has some sort of like meat to it. I don't read college AUs unless it's specifically my favorite ships and nobody has done anything with this ship for a few days. I am starved for content and I must stoop to the level of reading college fics. No dig at the author. It's just like I don't personally like reading them because they feel really slow and drawn out to a point that I don't. I'll like lose my place and then not want to pick it back up because I don't see where it's going, which doesn't make me very eager to continue reading things like that. Uh, Back to what I was saying. The countdown sort of plot where like, oh yeah, there's a prophecy and we have to stop X event before prophecy happens. The pacing is usually going to be a lot quicker because the characters are going to be focused, hopefully, on said overarching threat. And then, the plot is revolving around this timer that they have to mitigate or deal with or appease, what have you, which lets the story be told in a very, comparatively, of course, in a very snappy, quick way, where we don't waste too much time on things that don't matter. And before you start thinking, oh, then you have no character development. No, I said things that don't matter. Character development is something that matters immensely. So we will still focus on it. We'll just find ways to fit it in natural settings. Again, between travel, this is where you get your campfire scene, or this is where you get your carriage story scene, things like that. Um, for stories that are more insidious, like insidious sounds threatening. For stories that are more behind the veil, that sounds mysterious and sexy. For stories that are more behind the veil, such as expanding a city, right, in like a post-apocalypse setting or something, something that's more behind the veil, will lend itself to having a longer pace because you want to set the grassroots to let your lawn bloom, if you know what I'm trying to say here. If you hear my throat sound weird, that's because it does. There's something stuck in my throat, and my throat has been very acidic all day, so I just got off of a few hours long talk with some friends, so uh, which was I was originally going to do some world building in there. Not like with them, it's just like background noise and like while I'm working on planning out my new story. And then got distracted with just helping them play Inscription. So, but for these more behind the veil sort of style plots, you're going to be lending yourself with spreading out your pacing, letting scenes drag on just a bit. But we don't want your pace to be too slow because that becomes boring for the reader. That makes your story be overinflated to a point where it becomes tiring or aggravating or a chore to read, and that's not what we ever want to do. And at times it can even become a chore to write, and that's not absolutely what we do not want to do. You're writing the story for two reasons. The first is for yourself, and incredibly, and I mean incredibly, like razor's edge second close second, is you're writing this for the audience, be it a reader, be it your players, or what have you. We don't want our pacing to be too slow because again it becomes a chore to read slash write, and that's no fun. We're here to tell engaging, interesting stories, and to go too slow runs the risk of needless fluff for the sake of needless fluff, repeating yourself, which can just become aggravating and almost feel insulting to your readers, makes them feel like, oh, I'm sorry, poor baby, you need to explain to you, sure, I'll do it again. If you get what I'm trying to say there. And then, and makes you seem almost incompetent as though you don't know where the story is going, which is never fun. There is, of course, the enlightened centrist. Do everything, right? Like we need a perfect balance. I'm not going to tell you something so stupid as that, right? Where we all know we want a good balance of multiple aspects. But I will try to give you some tips on how to spot slow pacing. Usually, when I start feeling like I have slow pacing, it's because I find myself losing interest in the scene I'm writing. And then from there, I have to discover within myself, within my heart, whether or not it's burnout or if it's the scene. If it's burnout, I'll give you some tips how I avoid burnout for my writing works. I either swap projects for a day or three, usually like a week, or I work on something within the project but at a different scene. Maybe I that finally put to words that future idea for a scene that I have. Maybe the fun fact, guys. From the chapter I'm writing right now for my fanfic on AO3, before I even wrote the second paragraph for the chapter in Works, I wrote an entire non-canon chapter for a chapter that has not been even written yet that will go like 5 chapters in the future. Before I even wrote the second paragraph for the current chapter because I just wasn't feeling it for a while. But now I'm back into the swing of things, etc. So, and then because of my fresh new eyes on the scene, I was able to do what I wanted to, which is this is like an interlude section between like plot beats and like not scrap, shift the goal of that chapter to have a little bit of setup work for the rest of the few more plot beats and also have some character interactions that were sorely lacking. Because I took a step back, realized this feels too slow, this feels redundant, hell, this feels unnecessary. I'll go away for a while and then come back when I feel like I can actually write this. And it's still a slower scene in comparison to the rest of the things I've been writing so far, but not a needless one, I hope. I'll have to wait till the chapter goes out and then we'll see. But not a needless one, I hope. There's when you make a scene, you don't. Not every scene needs a clear-cut goal, but every scene could benefit from one. When you make a scene, in the back of your head, you should be thinking, what is the point of this scene? Not what is the point of this scene? Oh, this is useless. No, ask yourself genuinely, what is the point of this scene? Am I writing this to set up for a future plot thread? Am I writing this for the benefit of character interactions? Am I writing this for the benefit of world building? And then from there, trim. Please do trim. Trim the fat, feather the chicken, whatever. Kill your darlings, leave things on the cutting room floor, because sometimes you need to. If you feel like a scene is going on for too long, take a break, come back later, reread your stuff, get a friend to reread your stuff with or for you, and then make changes as applicable to shorten things down. But what if your pacing is too quick? Breakneck pacing. The same thing does still apply here. Take a step back, breathe a little bit, focus your attention on something else, maybe things around the house, who knows, do a little bit of chores, come back in a few days. And then, when you're ready, reread over what you read, and then also keep in mind or write down or think about it afterwards, what have you, what you're planning for the scene in order to focus on that. It can still be a quick scene, but it doesn't need to be so quick. I struggle with this, especially in action scenes, because I really don't want those to drag on, because then those just aren't fun. It's a slog. But I don't want them to be too quick, because then they feel like they lacked weight and they were pointless, which is a big issue I have in writing action scenes, because it's not something I find myself writing so much. Maybe I should just have a fucking ridiculous, comically hyper-violent world in my docs just to constantly practice writing fight scenes or something. Um, but even this can go even for without um, fight scenes. It can, like, if your main character is, say, going through a library in order to find books on an occult topic, a scene where they enter the library, ask around the librarian, who becomes very shifty, and then who becomes very shifty, tries to push them off. The main character then brushes off the librarian and scours through the bookshelves, and then you say like 15 minutes later they have a collection in their arms of books on Mesopotamian fertility goddesses or some shit like that, whatever the fuck have you. Uh, that could be too quick because in this scenario I presume you're writing horror, I guess. Um, or even if you're not writing horror, but still, like that scene feels very quick, like you're trying to breeze by it. Maybe that's fine sometimes, but for a scene like this, which sounds in this context very plot heavy, very impactful, you could really do a lot better to slow it down and spread things around. Have a conversation with the librarian, right? Beyond just the whole they're acting shifty, here's a few lines emphasizing that. Have it slow down and have it be a proper dialogue exchange. Not a conversation, a dialogue exchange. Break up the sentence, double space, sentence, double space, sentence, double space, sentence, double space, with adding a few descriptors, right? Describe how the librarian's face falls, the hand motions they do, the shifting of their eyes, the constantly trying to type on the computer to seem busy, almost to discourage the main character from continuing this line of questioning, and then describe your main character too. Talk about how they put their hands on their desk and lean forward to feign surprise or to feign interest. Talk about how they straighten their back to seem more authoritative. Talk about how they change the pitch of their voice in order to try for intimidation factor. By slowing these down and then adding these details as necessary that your scene didn't originally have, it makes the scene feel a lot more dynamic, makes it feel a lot more impactful, makes it feel a lot more vital. Doesn't need to be literally, but the illusion of depth can do a lot for your story. Which sounds like a dick move, but it is true. And then from there forward, you can have the scene of after they blow off the librarian, they can go into the shelves. And then it doesn't need to be super long, but it can be there of how as they keep scouring through the shelves, they just can't find anything they're looking for. And then, they start looking out of history and start looking in other places. Maybe they find it in the religion section. And the book is like pages towards the aisle as opposed to the spine. So they like trail their hands over it, feel like the pages opening slightly beneath their fingertips, look over in confusion, pull it from the shelf, and happen to expose part of the cover, and then realize, oh shit, this is what I'm looking for. Who the fuck puts it back like this? Which can be a thing that the main character brushes off at first, and then later on it can be realized like, oh fuck, that was being hidden from me, sort of angle, right? Where I think the scene will start becoming too drawn out, just a personal like note, where I think the scene will start becoming too drawn out is when you're just transcribing what the book says, because we the audience don't need to know what the book says one to one. We just need to get a general feel for what the book says. A few quips or lines here and there is nice. Paragraphs on paragraphs on paragraphs is not, unless it's specifically like a world building thing, but that's not fun to read either. That's a pace breaker that isn't fun. Again, personally, I'm not averse to the first chapter or so being in a world building chapter in order to establish something for me, the reader, to better make myself knowledgeable on the world, to make the future chapters easier for you, the author, to write without needing big, blocky chunks of exposition. This used to be industry standard. Hell, Star Wars opens with a fucking text block, right? It used to be common practice and fell by the wayside because audiences started to move away from them, I believe. But personally, I think it can solve some issues. Consider it or don't. But where I think the scene will start dragging on is if you are just transcribing what the book says for like 200 words or so or something. Or if another character starts entering the conversation between the MC and the librarian, because that's not super necessary for what we're establishing here. Or if the main character like checks out other books as well, right? You don't need to mention every book or why they checked it out. You can mention it in passing. Oh yeah, they checked out the book they need for the plot, and also a few others for leisure, and leave it at that. You don't need to like write out the scene of them picking what books to take with them, the scene of them making a library card, shit like that. That's not something you need to do. But it can still be a quick scene, right, comparatively, because the scene I laid out to you, again, it's a bare bones, it's threadbare, but threadbare. Huh. I think I like that name. You can leave your comments on how lame that was now. Uh, and sure, the scene was a bit threadbare, but you get the thing I'm trying to tell you here. Of puts down my bottle. Thing I'm trying to tell you here of like it's still a quick scene, but it lets itself be more than just a 5 paragraph scene. We've extended it up towards 20, right? Not counting the dialogue exchange because that is a whole like thing. I tend weird, but I guess this one might be shorter actually. Isn't that funny? Given how like quick I'm breezing through these because I don't have that many tangents, huh? We finished off this bottle of water actually. I'm getting a bit nauseous. Maybe this one should be quicker then. Um, I kind of just got into it, so I guess I'll finish off this little tidbit. The pacing for scenes is not something that will be like clear cut. Again, you're gonna have to reread your stuff. You're gonna have to edit your own work. Something I also do to keep myself from getting burnout is if I feel myself having burnout coming, I don't write that day, and instead that's my dedicated editing day. I'll go back, I'll read through what I wrote up to that point, fix grammar errors, fix like sentencing errors that don't flow well, add to or subtract from scenes, trim or add. I'll do that right as a sort of not cheat day, but as a sort of like I don't feel up to the task of writing more scenes. Instead, I'll just polish what I currently have in order to keep my interest while still writing this project. You can take that as you wish because I believe that's a good technique to have is to keep your interest on here while still doing good work, right? But pacing for scenes is not something that's like a definite sort of thing. It's really just like a vibe thing, right? If you just got off of a very long, very drawn out sort of tense scene with a lot of political subterfuge, maybe the next 3 scenes won't be so much that, right? Maybe they'll be a lot or a bit or what have you, shorter than that scene. Not only because it's a nice way to give your plot a little bit of time to breathe, because as much as we like stories focusing on their plot, they do need time to breathe sometimes. A lot of times, actually. But also because by having the next few scenes be shorter, it makes the previous long scene feel just that much more dramatic and lengthy, something that sits in the minds of your players or reader or what have you. Because they probably won't even know, but their brain will slowly form the sub connections in the background like, oh wow, these scenes are going by a bit quick. That means that last scene must have been important, and it will remain in the minds of your audience a lot better that way through pattern-seeking brains and comparison. Which means that the lengths of the scenes can dictate the length of the next scene. If you've had a bunch of quick, snappy fight to travel to uh, to information gathering to a stakeout, now the breaking and entering scene of them stepping into the minor noble's house can be long and drawn out because the plot was really asking for you to slow down for a minute there. You see what I mean? The scenes beforehand and the scenes afterwards can set up for each other. They may be unconnected in terms of your plot, but they're not unconnected in terms of your story, which is an interesting thing to think about, isn't it? There's the meta angle of the reader, and then there's the literal angle of the universe, and then how that shifts our perspective on the pace. Because I already mentioned before, the fantasy story takes place over a longer time period, but is a quicker story for us, the reader. And then I mentioned some stuff like this in the SCP video because, of course, it would come up in the SCP video, and I don't remember how to repeat myself right now, mostly because it's a little bit late and I'm kind of blanking on a lot of things. But I hope you get what I'm trying to say. But it's also important to establish when these scenes are happening. You don't want these scenes to happen too late. Obviously, the finale will be a big, heavy sort of thing, so that will probably be one of the scenes that are a bit on the slower side, more lengthy side, what have you. But you don't want all of your plot to start picking up at the end, right? Because pacing is not only from like how long the scenes are drawn up, but pacing is also when the plot picks up and when the plot like really kicks in, or like when the plot starts creeping in and what have you. You don't want all of this to start happening in one solid chunk towards the end, because that makes the beginning of your story seem worthless. It makes the beginning of your story seem bland, without substance, and then makes your audience either subconsciously or actually literally go, well, you didn't really need the first chunk of the story. It could have really done without it. And then that becomes a whole thing. It's like, oh yeah, that'll bounce your readers off before you even get into the plot you want to tell. But conversely, you don't want it to be too early, because at that point, the rest of your story becomes superfluous, useless. Or the middle of your story becomes very long and drawn out, or very like bam, 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 bam. I don't know where I'm going with this. Bam, 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 bam. Please help me. Right? So these really should have been like too late slash too early, but they're two separate points, so whatever. Let's just treat them like one point right now. Big thing you want to take, and then you don't even really want everything in the middle, because then it makes the beginning and end seem fucking useless again, again, again. The trick, would you believe it? Man advocates for best of both worlds. Wow. Wow. Rapid clap, XQC clip, edit, edit, XQC edit, clip edit, whatever the fuck it is. Um, it's a trick. It really is a trick to understand like how much to drip feed your audience. It's a bit easier with tabletop games because you're playing with some boys, right? You got your crew with you, which makes whatever they bounce off of you help you plan your shit. But when you're writing a story, this is a bit trickier. Something I obviously struggle with because, hey, I'm not that great, and I recognize that, but I'm trying to get better. Is this part of my... Is this broken? My bed frame broken? No, it's fine. We're less than 100 pounds. How the fuck? Okay. Um... What was that about? Right. It's like it's a trick. It's a bit difficult to get everything where you need it to be and have it flow well and all that. But if you find yourself going for long swaths without much to write on for the plot, right, that's relevant to the plot, that caters to the plot, you might need a restructuring as a whole, as opposed to taking it from a scene-by-scene basis. Read all you have written up to that point. If you find a very plot dense section, and this is not something I like suggesting because generally speaking I don't like removal, I instead like addition, like adding to things. But sometimes that's not a pace you can keep for the story. You can't have all of your story be very plot dense the whole way through. That's ridiculous. You'll burn yourself out. You're going to resent your work. Instead, what I can recommend, however, is if, again, you find yourself with long, thick swaths of parts of your story that are very thin on the plot, go back and analyze if you either have a really dense bubble of plot-heavy scenes, or have simply forgotten to add the plot, in which case you still need restructuring. And if you find that really dense bubble of plot-heavy scenes, kill your darlings. Rip out parts of those, and then reconstitute them later in. Keep in mind, I am not telling you to plug and play. I am telling you to rip them out, reconstitute them, and put them into other parts of the story as you have written it so far. Again, you will need to restructure. You will need to remake the draft, but it will help your story feel a lot more natural, a lot more well-paced, and it flows a lot better for the audience and you, the writer. So, with that big plot, dense, plot-heavy thread, Find where you snuck in new plot threads and then weave those out and have a little and replace them with a little bit more mystery, a little bit more character growth, a smidge of world building, and then with that wriggling plot thread in your hand, find the spot where it can be injected in pretty easily, and then prepare the injection site, i.e., shift things around, add or remove scenes as necessary, worm it in, and then start braiding. And then do this as much as you need to in order to remove a big chunk of dense plot and instead have it be a nice, smooth ride, if you see what I'm trying to say. And then this could also be towards the end, right? You see a lot of too much right there on the end, making it very bottom heavy. Remove a few things, and at that point, you might need to literally just leave them on the cutting room floor for your next writing project. Of course, you could still go back and then weave them in, so it's a bit more like hip bone to calf as opposed to knee to calf, if you get what I'm trying to say here, and that'll be your story. But don't be afraid to literally just drop things, because sometimes it's fine to just drop things and then accept that you can't do it in the story and to save it for a future story that you will enjoy writing as well. It's, again, a lot of vibes. If you have a beta reader, go ahead, send it to your beta reader. If you have friends, go ahead and send it to friends. Fucking, I don't know, yell at someone on Reddit, ask them to beta read for you, right? It might work. Go off on Tumblr or some shit. See what people can do for you. If you're in a Discord, I don't know, just ask someone and they might say yeah. Don't be a dick though. Alright, don't be an ass. So, if you do need to restructure your draft, how do you go about it? Now we're going to talk about skeleton plots, checklists, drafts, and storyboarding. Now, it goes by many names. I've heard skeleton plots, and that's the one I use the most. I call it the skeleton. But I've also heard people say checklists, character bibles, story bibles. It's drafts is the universal catch-all term, as is storyboarding. Now, I call it skeleton plots because I have weird analogies. I say this is the skeleton in my story, and then I will later add the muscles and fat and then maybe the skin, because that's just how my brain works. What I mean, and I'm doing this now so I understand how powerful of a tool it is. When you have the idea for your plot and then get the drive to go ahead and start with it, make a little Google Doc or make a physical piece of paper or a notebook or what have you, and write down the idea you had, the topics you want to hit on, the factions of your story, the villain of your story, the main character of your story, the themes, the motifs, and then slowly assemble them to be the threadbare version of your plot. That's your skeleton. You'll then set this aside because this is the threadbare version, and then add what I called the muscle or the fat. I think in this case it was the fat. And then you will add the fat. You will take the checklist that you made, the skeleton that you have, and then as you're going through it, write them down in order, and then continue to add on a little bit more world building. In this scenario right here, the villain will now be named, will now be described. The main character will now be named and now be described. The factions will now have likes and dislikes, and then figures of note is the fat of the story. And then you will, do that to whatever else you need. You'll elaborate on the idea you had and then say why you think this could be good for your story. You'll elaborate on the themes, motifs, and then make examples on how you can insert them into the story. That's your fat. That's your first draft. From there, you will then add the muscles, which is giving them background, intertwining them with each other, and then throwing your main character in the middle of it, giving your main character a little bit of backstory, giving them ties to the villain or why they want to see the villain or antagonist dealt with, handled, what have you. And then the villain's opinions on various things from and then you see how it's building on itself. And then, finally, you can make chapter 1. This is important because it helps you to eliminate a lot of the early issues you have with pacing of your story as a whole. Because you have this clear-cut vision in mind, well, not super clear-cut, but because you have this boneworks in mind, You can follow along the major arteries in order to slash where they need to let the blood flow into the paper. Because you have the pre-planned thing out already, which helps the scene, which helps the story rather, not feel mega beginning or end or middle heavy, right? And you might be thinking, cheese underscore stick one. I don't get what you mean by middle heavy. I mean, like in terms of a kebab, the meat and vegetables are in the center of the skewer, and there's none towards your hand or towards the end of it. Think of it like that. We want the kebab to be even all the way through, because that way it's easy to balance and hold. And that way it's a nice, wonderful, savory meal the whole way through. Um, but here's the cool part, is these skeleton plots, these checklists, these drafts, it doesn't need to be for just the story as a whole. If you're having trouble understanding where your story can take place next, you can do these for specific scenes. You can you could have 3 different ideas for the way the scene will go, write them out, and then pick the one you think is best for your story, or even just the one you like the best. Or you can go, I like this part of scene 1, the ending of scene 3, and the dialogue of scene 2, and then put those aside, study it for an hour, and then go, okay, here's how I can have it flow. Because you can do these for just on a scene by scene basis, and I encourage that as well, especially if you're having issues with understanding where your scene should go next. It's not a tactic I have employed myself, because I only just recently started doing this whole like skeleton plot thing, because it's just, I don't know, I was weird, I was impulsive when I started writing. And believe me, it has been such a load off my back. It has been a sigh of relief. It has been so nice to just let myself prepare ahead of time and then have the story be a lot better for it. So, and remember how I said that your characters, your factions, your villain can go on these plot points? Here's how we do character pacing. Now, this is like a fine balance because of how many characters you'll probably have in your story. When I remember how I said the campfire scene, the travel scene, this is where your characters will start to form bonds with one another and therefore start forming bonds with the reader, the audience. When your players get attached to their characters, this is important because you don't outside of tabletop. In tabletop, it can go pretty quick actually, and I kind of recommend it to be quick because that way your plots will succeed for it. But for the story, it shouldn't happen very quickly. You might be thinking that's a bit weird because you just said it works for tabletop games. Why shouldn't it work for stories? Because that's pretty much the same thing. The reason it shouldn't work for stories is because if you front load all of the emotional baggage, all the character development, all of the arcs at the beginning, you will be left with a big blank nothing for the rest of your story, outside of a few tweaks here and there, maybe like a visual upgrade, maybe like a new trick they learn. But that pales in comparison. That pales in comparison to the beginning of your story, which will make your characters seem shallow. They may not be shallow, but because we're so used to seeing them as they are because the first acts dealt with their issues, it makes them feel shallow because we don't see them grow for the bulk of the plot, the bulk of the story. Enemies to Lovers does not thrive on the enemies being 3 chapters and the lovers being 80. Enemies to Lovers thrives on the enemies being 20 chapters, them start warming up to another for 40 chapters, and then the lovers being the final 5 and the 15 being 15 chapters of straight hardcore real fucked up smut, or something like that. Before I fucked that analogy bad, you get what I'm saying here, right? Is the character dynamics work because we get to see them grow slowly, realistically, and we can form unhealthy coping like mechanisms on these poor fuckers as a result. Wow, I project so hard. Who in comments can relate, huh? Let's be sad fuckers together, yeah? But keep in mind not to front load character pacing, and absolutely please do keep in mind not to end load character pacing, because then for the first Not even for the bulk of your story, the characters are insufferable as hell. Have it. This is one where it's really more part and parcel, bits and pieces, odds and ends, what have you. It's chunk by chunk by chunk, following nodes, which is generally speaking not how you really want to plan out things. But for character arcs like this, emotional development like this, it helps to have it be in the mindset of going from node to node, which usually feels like railroady and a one-track mind and sort of not fun for the stories to get the chance to breathe, but it can help a lot in this situation specifically. And then pacing for stories. It's again story heavy, plot heavy, bulk, the bulk of vibes. Again, I can't recommend enough getting someone to read your stuff over. Keep in mind, I don't do that, but when I'm planning, I do bounce ideas off of people even if they don't know it. Um, you can talk to a wall. I've done it. You can get a notebook, write in, and then respond to yourself like a separate person. This is probably a poor coping mechanism, but it's something that can help you workshop ideas for your story because workshopping ideas for your story helps you keep a solid, consistent, nice pace that won't break under scrutiny, which is very important for telling engaging stories. And I still struggle with it myself, but I hope that these things I told you so far can help you understand like how I approach pacing, which I hope is a good way to approach pacing. I don't really see people mentioning pacing outside of like, oh, make sure to pace your stories well, but they never say how. As a result, I hope this has been a nice how. Thank you for watching. Please do comment more ideas for me to like ramble on about because I'm kind of running out. Again, I know I say this a lot, but please actually do comment like nobody ever does. And I think I'll catch you later. Hopefully this weekend I will do the Cosmic Horror video finally. I have been tacking on more and more ideas for that, right? Like more plot threads or plot points or like basically like things to talk about. So it'll probably be a hefty one, I hope. And I'll figure out how I'll actually record it later because I don't actually really know how to record anything that isn't this one image or like an EXE game window. Thank you for watching, though. I hope this has been a good help, and I'll catch you later. If you continue to watch my content, please do. I It's nice to know people watch my stuff. Anyway, have a good night. I say that because it's nighttime. Please keep yourselves healthy. Like I said earlier, don't don't let me be better than you. That's sad.